Reflecting on the current situation that we are in the world, I think that's absolutely fascinating theme. And love and devotion, when you reflect on it, has a lot to offer. So I'm really excited by the theme. It's fantastic. When you think about Persia, we really go back to Babylonian times, really. You go to Sumerians, Akkadians, and Sasanians, all these kind of empires definitely had given a lot to the Persian as a name. But Persians are definitely a group of people who, as we all know, created a great deal of civilizations, and the founder of Persian Empire was, of course, Cyrus the Great, who conquered the Babylon. And in a nutshell, Persians are a group of people who we know created great civilizations, and we are still today, when reflecting on our civilization, we look back to that era far, far more than pre-Islamic history that we inherited in 7th centuries when the Islam arrived to Iran and other parts, yeah. Still today is quite mysterious to the mind of the West. What do we do with these Persians? Who are they? How do they think? How do they feel? How come they have created these amazing civilizations, this amazing poetry? I mean, we got Rumi, we got Hafiz, we got Omar Khayyam, but why they behave like this? So all those kind of things are fascinating. It's almost, you say, profound fascination, but at the same time, concern about how we could really get to know these amazing minds who are like this or like that. So I don't see it negative, but it makes me wonder why the West is so fascinated. At the same time, I'm always asking myself why there is negativity and huge admiration as well. That's just within that context, I understand it. Your question is very important because we have to really go to the soul of Persians. And the soul of Persians, as I understand it, really is embedded in the poetry of these great poets that the West, or we read, particularly Omar Khayyam, Hafiz, Sa'di, and specifically Rumi, that we call Maulana. So we all refer, if you want to know your soul, you have to read these greats. So to get to know Persians in a sense and how poetry is, there's certain approach to poetic suffering or profound, poetically philosophical questions about the existence, and in relation with whether you believe in God, whether you believe in your civilizations, you believe in what you imagine the world to be or is, they all are really structured, built in the psychology of great minds of Persians. This is how I approach the great soul. So to get to know the soul is a very complex thing to say, but I like to start with this. What is the soul? It needs a lot of definitions. But when I read Omar Khayyam, when I read Rumi, I'm always seeking how they communicate with my soul as a Persian person.
And when you say that, you don't particularly mean it in a religious way?
No, not in my case.
So can you make that difference?
Yes, not in my case. It is, for me, I look into the philosophical questions that they ask of me about my ethical responsibility towards friends, for instance, towards other human beings, towards those people who are into absolute joy. And because I think the poetry ultimately demands that you have to live to arrive to a joyful being. Hence, it's more existential and more, we use it in philosophy, looking into ontological rather than metaphysical. But there is no doubt many people have different interpretations, but we are arriving to the point that it's more about why do I exist? Why do I love my friend? Why do I? Why is a question referred to the self rather than to you? As you read Rumi, it says, it's me who's asking these questions of me. I have to come out of myself in order to be able to understand how I feel rather than tell you how you feel. So those kind of questions are uniquely part of that soul that I'm referring. But the West is always about, I think, therefore I exist. And that's very important. So I think both for me makes a lot of interesting way of reflecting to the Persian poetry. And so Persian poetry is, I think, is still unattended. Despite of all attentions, I think it has a lot to offer us in 20th century if we ask questions rather than, I understand it, how beautiful it is, how fantastic it is. I don't think that's would be the Persian poetry that I understand. So that's where the soul is. I'm still searching for the soul of, for instance, Rumi. What is this soul that any time that I read produce something for me? Because it hits me, sort of, almost. But I don't look at it within the religious, traditional religious context or definitions, no. Poetry, as I understand it, or we understand it, is a very unique way of purification of the mind. It definitely challenges those senses which are antagonistic towards anything. Anything. Again, as I understand it, is destruction of the modern ego that we understand. There is no ego. There is I, but not the I that we defined it within the modern discourses or even past discourses of who am I, in a sense. Because the I is destroying that ego in order to body and mind unite. There's a unity between I and the body, in a mind and the body, in relation to language, in which there is no fear of being misunderstood by the world. If you read Rumi, it releases anything. It leaves us with our own presuppositions. It says, I am free from everything, suffering or not. And that's where I think music is so essential. Poetry, in Persian, poetry doesn't make sense if there is no music. Music doesn't make any sense if there is no poetry. They are intertwined, glued, absolutely. So this is where language is not even observed. That's why you see Persian music constantly produces through improvisations. Even today, when the greats go to Paris, to London, to New York, or come here, they sit, there is nothing. There are certain arrangements, but you have to really get into the heart of the singer to allow him or her, the poetry sings through them. So we say, Rumi is singing through Shajarian and others. So within that context, they are really together. I can't read Rumi without feeling music and vice versa. And that's where I think ultimately the true self, and we know that by great 20th century philosophers telling us, is in the being of the music and particularly poetry. We have to go to poetic spaces in order to be who we claim to be. Otherwise, we are just intellectualizing all the time. So it's destruction of that intellect. Hence, the music is like a fountain. I mean, Rumi says there is no love greater than love. What does it mean? We don't have time to go to it. So it's that love is undefinable. You could take it as a religious, you could take it as an existential thinker, you could take it as an ordinary. It allows you to go anywhere you like. I love that because it does not impose a fixed meaning. So music is like that because everybody has its own little responses or reactions to the music. So it is very important. That's very part of the soul, maybe, I don't know. Emotion, unfortunately, in the West has been overanalyzed. Rationality is a form of emotion because you watch it. If you got that intellectual ability to remember that you are not mentally something, you are not diagnosed as such. So the poet as I understand Rumi, doesn't have any time for that because he knows where he is within the self. So that's what he says, the eloquence of language, he says it. I don't know where it comes from. The beauty of a rose, how this rose is going to open, the curiosity of the emotive mind, like Rumi is, I'm constantly fascinated. So by emotion, we're talking about this absolute fascination, but constantly aware. Don't keep it at bay to intellectualize. Intellect is essential. Actually, they think very intellectually, but that intellect does not dictate the meaning of how they feel. They are in the meaning. Intellect is describing what does it mean. They don't need it. Omar Khayyam doesn't need it. He said, look, this is it. This moment is the moment that you are going. Take it or leave it. You could intellectualize it. No, I'm scared. He said, you're going to be mad tomorrow. I've seen it. So I dance to life. Whatever it is there, I'm there. So that sounds a bit irrational, but when you look at it, if you intellectually use it, my God, he lives in the moment. He is in the presence, and he feels it, and he passes it to me. It's up to me to take it or not. So if I'm rational, I don't want to go there. If I am, oh my God, I need it. I think that's why Fitzgerald becomes so fascinated by Omar Khayyam Rubaiyat, because this is the Victorian era. Science and technology dominates. Englishman is repressed because you have to be totally rational in order to keep going with science. He says, I had enough of it. And if you go to the beginning of the last century, you see so many clubs opened up simply because they could express themselves emotionally. So human emotion is uniquely human emotion. Depends how you take it or leave it. So I would not distinguish between West and East, but the East in this context, within this poets, still allows us to think, yes, purity of the emotion is purity of your antagonistic, I like to call it, feelings, whether towards yourself, towards others, towards the world, because we have a lot of it. So they say, I don't want to go there. I rather prefer to, I mean, you can see it in the mystic Catholic things like Saint Francis and others. I mean, there are many in the European countries, but they are far more clear to me. Within that context, I think emotion is it. Without emotion, you and I cannot talk about humanity. But intellect, you could scheme, justify, reason out. But how far we could reason out to destroy the nature? To say this race is better than the other one. The Rumi says, I'm neither Muslim, nor a Jew, nor from land of Iraq, nor from East, nor from East, I am. What I am. Sounds very illogical, but putting into contemporary language and analyze it says so much. This is a poem that was written 500 years ago in that circumstances. So this is very purity of emotions. I mean, in our kind of emotional things, I invite you to a conversation. You and I are in a place called the world. You define it. I define it. But Rumi says we don't need to define it. I recognize you are from that culture or that region. But why we have to bring that into this conversation? If the question is poetry, which reveals all our presuppositions. But he says, no presuppositions. A human being must not enter into any space, according to him, and that's very, very difficult demand, and he lived it. Presupposition. And unfortunately, most of us bring presuppositions into any conversation. So he says, there is no geography in my mind. Hence, my heart is open. There is no way that I can see fish coming from Adriatic Sea as opposed to Oceanic Sea. There is a sea, and I'm in it. Wherever I am part of that sea. So this is how he invites us to reflect on this togetherness, so to say. Authentic encounter, as I understand it by reading Rumi and others, is just come with love. Love means, for me as a human being. So that love is not purely sensual, all those kind of things that we bring into it with intellect. But look, let language be absolutely free. If you are scared, fine. But I am in the ocean. I'm not scared of any shark or any fish. If they intend to take me away, take me away. If not, I'm not gonna live with that fear. It's a very gross kind of assessment, but ultimately, there is no geography. Humanity must prevent. It's very huge demand, and Rumi lived it. And it's any line that you read, according to him, we all are the flutes. Each of us suffer or enjoy life according to his or her own uniqueness. But how we share it, or prevent, or bring our judgments, prejudices, traditions, all those kind of things into the conversation, that's is beyond him. He doesn't want to enter into it. We're just talking nonsense, quite frankly. So storytelling, whether it's informative or not, it's very, very important. And if you go back to Shahnameh you referred to, it's full of it. It reminds us of our mythology, just like Homer, referring to Iliad and things. But Iliad is imagined by Homer, whereas Shahnameh are factual figures, places that exist. Still today, those names exist in Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, part of Iran. They all are part of Persian, old Persian. So storytelling is, again, different aspect of defining our identity. Poetry is very different. Poetry is about the soul of Persianhood, as far as I know, feel it. Whereas Shahnameh is about, I'm telling you who you were, who came, who did this, who did that, and keep it that way and reflect on your factual stories and figures and mythologies. So within that context, we seems to have minds that shift. I think everybody do. I mean, Greek does it and French do it. So it's not a uniquely Persian, but it has its own explicit way of defining it. And we need that more than ever, even in Iran today. And people are actually using these sources far more than they did before. So storytelling is usually it's more oral, whereas written is more poetry in a sense of remembering what Hafiz said, what Omar Khayyam said, and how we interpret their secret codes, because some people think they talk in secret codes or things like that, yes. Since 1979, about 6 million Iranians, for different reasons, left Iran. And in my research, the sense of displacement, dislocation, has created a great deal of anxiety and frustration for them, whether they've been stigmatized or cannot cope or think they lost their identities, all those kind of things. I learned from my research that they all go to the poets to reinterpret their identities, to re-engage with their identities, with their losses, and figure out their emotional state. So there is a kind of poetic resilience thanks to reading Rumi, Omar Khayyam, reflecting on the stories of Ferdowsi, and some contemporary poets like Forough Farrokhzad, Sohrab Subehri. They are very interesting figures. And within that context, I think they live in that poetic space. because they don't tell huge stories, but say when I read Rumi, it gives me material to realize this is life. Exactly what we were saying earlier on. Wherever I am the flute. I am the reed. I am in my own pain, in my own hope, in my own resilience, in my own dreams. I'm building a life, but I'm not feeling that I'm a victim. And these poets give me that material. I think it's very unique in a sense. So how we use them, not just read because I like Rumi, but I read how to reinterpret my identity in diaspora, in displacement. So it's poetic spaces, going to the poets, feel poetic, and find meanings to reason, to move on. I think that's unique. That's very significant for me as a researcher here. Why these people go to poetry in order to talk to the host society, to Australians, to others, to their own children even. Yeah, Iranians, unfortunately, here, I don't want to go into politics, but the social political circumstances that Iranian experience is constantly full of violence and distress, uncertainty, feeling that they are profoundly misunderstood by the West because of the system. That all causes great deal of distress for them. Hence, there is a kind of trauma that they bring. I mean, Iranians, for instance, there are many of Iranians who came here or elsewhere are the result of the war between Iran and Iraq. They bring a lot of trauma with themselves. And the lack of freedom and democracy to express yourself, it generates certain profound, depends how far you've been subject of difficulties. So by that I mean that kind of traumatic. And a large proportion is of also they feel, whether they're right or wrong, depends on each individual's experience, they've been misunderstood in the West because we are Persians, we civilizations, and that formed a certain negativity in their imagination that they perceive badly. For Persia is mystical. It's very profound, not only question, but the way that Iranians exist. Their existence is that. It's very mysterious. They cannot let go. I mean, you could say any other cultures do. But I think because of the circumstances and all those kind of things that we just discussed, that's become even far more entrenched in the psyche. Persia is beautiful. It's still untapped, and I mean it in this context. It has very mysterious places to visit by many other Iranians who have not, or if they did it just touristically. It's not an examined place, as we understand in philosophy. So it is mysterious, but I think in this case, giving relatively a negative meaning, psychological meaning, to concept of emotion. Iranians are too emotional about that concept. And that could be a bit detrimental, decapacitating. But deep beneath that, I think they started exploring what does it mean to come from a place with that culture. And by the way, Iran today comprises of many other cultures, but they have very close affinity with each other. Persian is the dominant culture, but we got other cultures too. And in that, it's good to be reminded. So that's it. It is mysterious even to Iranians, to many Iranians. They might not use this term. The fact that they cannot really pinpoint a definition means it's mysterious. And the fact that they are still attached to Rumi, Omar Khayyam, Hafiz and Saadi and other poets, they are looking for that answer in this mysterious poetry. I think it's what kind of meanings emanates to me when I read Rumi. That's very mystical, very mysterious. Why? Any time that I read Rumi or Hafiz or others, or even Shakespeare in a sense, if you look at or looking at great Dante, if you look at them, they always provide very mysterious meanings in you. So I say it's you. It tells you to deal with it. It's not me. I done my job. I went without any ingrain of dust in me. I recognize all of it. I just released it as much as I can. No, I'll pass it on to you. So that mystery is really what it gives me and how I deal with those emotions that it invokes, provokes. I could shut it. That's where intellect is. Or I could be in it and feel miserable or joyful. And that's where I think the wailing dervishes dance seems to be. But unfortunately, it's becoming kind of, as you were referring earlier on, a little commodity for customers or tourists. But the dances of Rumi is the absoluteness of moment. I am not here, I am nowhere. I am in the soul as I understand it. I cannot even dare to define it. He invites us to that dance, if I could be poetic. There's a dance that we all like to have. Where it is, we all know it, but whether we go to it or not, that's it's up to. So the code, I think, is that. Because Rumi, maybe most of your viewers would not know, Rumi never actually wrote his poetry. Rumi, it's fascinating you're talking about the sound now. Rumi in the markets would stop. If there is a sound from anywhere, anybody, in any trade that affected his nervous system, he would stand and dance and release his poetry. And they write it. That's why he has so many friends, because he begged them to just write. So it's just, he was really it. And he would respond to absoluteness of the moment. So that's why he's quite unique in many ways. That's a very unique soul, as St. Francis was. Just wandering and talking to flowers or something. I mean, maybe make no sense to us perhaps, but definitely had huge impact. He was a mystic Christian. And that's why I wanted to make Rumi as a mystic Muslim.